we have another Robert. Robert's calling from Ohio to explain that he's not voting. So welcome, Robert. Why aren't you voting?
Hi guys. Um, so I really don't like Donald Trump. I could never see myself voting for him for a multitude of reasons. I'm registered independent though, if that matters. Um, but something that really kind of holds me back for Kamala, um, is mainly the abortion problem. And that's really one of the major reasons that stops me from voting um, Democrat every year because I haven't voted since 2016. And when I did in 2016, I went independent. Um, Last year or last election, I was very tempted to vote Biden, mainly because of the pandemic and thinking Donald Trump is not going to keep us safe and not taking this seriously. And then the whole January 6th thing happens. And
That's got to be a lie, Robert. There was no pandemic when you could vote for Biden.
What do you mean?
Oh, never mind. Never mind. I misheard you. I'm sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, no, you're good. So I'm not sure. Basically, so that's my point is I really don't like Trump. I think that Kamala is very um, well equipped. She's very qualified for the role of president. I think she'd do a whole hell of a lot better than Donald Trump would, and I really don't want to see him back in office.
But you're not willing to vote for her
maybe
just because she's not putting enough restrictions on women's bodies?
yes, well, see, that's why I wanted to talk to you guys because I know, and I've listened to the show for a long time, Matt. I've actually listened to you since I was about 11 or 12 years old. And I'm 20.
Explains the length of my beard.
27, 28 now.
That's
Anyway,
awesome.
I was making a joke that explains the length of my beard. Basically, you make me feel old, so thanks.
Yeah.
So okay.
And that's one thing that I've always had a trouble with understanding the perspective on many pro-choice people, and maybe we can just get into that, and I can try to understand a little better and maybe jump over the hurdle a bit.
I'm happy to give you just a quick anecdote real quick about why I'm particularly passionate about this. First of all, I'm passionate about women having autonomy over their own bodies, but I'm selfishly, I would like to stay alive a bit longer. And I had an ectopic pregnancy years ago that almost killed me. And I'm at a high risk of having another one if I were to get pregnant again. And that was a wanted pregnancy. And luckily, because it was wanted, that's why I was checking. And I happened to see early on that I was pregnant. If I hadn't have caught it, then I could have easily died because there weren't really other symptoms that I was pregnant. And ever since, luckily at the time, I was able to get treatment, life-saving treatment. And it actually took 2 attempts. I went through, it was basically 2-month process to finally get my body to stop trying to take itself out, essentially. And if that were to happen to me now in the state that I'm in, I would have to go to another state to seek treatment. And I would be at risk of dying if what the right wants to accomplish gets accomplished if they get into office. So that's a big one to me. So even if I can't convince you about abortion in general, like we don't have to debate that. Maybe Matt will want to get into that with you. It's not just abortion that is in this debate. It's women's bodies and their autonomy over that. So they're also talking about banning IVF. They're even talking about banning surrogacy, which is wild. So I don't feel like that's a good reason at all. Even if you are staunchly anti-abortion, there's so much more at risk with these conversations surrounding and these policies surrounding abortion.
Right. And, the ectopic pregnancies, I know that's not good for the people that are getting pregnant. Your life is at risk, like you're saying, so like I call myself pro-life. I do believe that, I don't know how you guys feel about wording it this way. Abortion ends a life, it ends a human life, but I'm not saying it's never a thing. Like if a woman is very sick or a person's very sick and pregnant and could possibly get seriously hurt or even killed, I think there's a place for abortion in that. I don't think we should have a blanket ban on every single abortion, because you saw that younger girl that she had a child, and doesn't matter how the child gets there. Now we have a kid that's basically gonna die, and he did die, I believe, if I'm remembering.
Which side do you think has that in mind more? Which side do you think is looking out for the health and safety of women or anybody in that situation? Do you think that it's Donald Trump, or do you think that it's Kamala Harris?
Well, I think Trump in particular doesn't really care about anybody except himself. But
yes,
on the right side, like the conservative side, and this is something that disillusioned me from a lot of conservative politics. In 2016, I think I mentioned I voted then. I voted for Evan McMullen, third party. And that was a big factor as well. You what?
You threw away your vote, is what you did. You don't need to tell me which irrelevant person that nobody's ever heard of and has never won an electoral vote and had no impact on the election you voted for. You threw away your vote.
Yeah, I see your perspective on that. But as I've been learning more about politics and looking more into it, because all the people that just rallied around Trump and everything, I know you guys have made the sentiment before that the right is pro-birth, not pro-life. And I definitely see a lot of that, because
I don't even think they're pro-birth, honestly, because the healthcare system, they are not interested at all in helping decrease, mortality rates amongst pregnant women. So I don't know that they are women when they're giving birth. That's already an issue too. So
yeah.
I have a couple of questions, Robert, specifically related to abortion that might make us get some headway. Are you in favor? Are you opposed to abortion being available for rape and incest?
So my personal, in an ideal situation, when I look at rape and incest, if it's a healthy baby, a healthy fetus, and the mother is healthy, I don't agree with abortion in those circumstances. No.
So you're fine with the fact that 26,000 women in Texas have been forced to give birth to their rapist babies since we put this restriction in on abortion. You're okay with that?
I'm not saying it's a good situation.
I didn't think you were standing up and applauding it, but you're okay with it. So,
right.
Why is it that anyone should, let me see if I can phrase this differently. Why don't you want people who can become pregnant to have bodily autonomy and decide that they no longer want to be pregnant? What gives you the right to force someone to be pregnant against their will? And how is that not rape?
I think, and let me know what you think about this perspective, that if ideally the medical help was there to where we could remove the fetus from the person's womb, and
yeah, I'm sorry we don't live in science fiction world right now. We have to deal with the reality. You don't get to invent science fiction solutions to real world problems. My question was, why aren't you willing to let women have bodily autonomy and decide? Why is it you think you and other people can force people to be pregnant when they don't want to be?
Well, that's, like I said, this is where I believe the situation is a problem. And like you said, we don't live in science fiction fantasy world, and I wish we would, because it would be a lot easier.
Yeah, it'd be a lot easier getting people who can't be pregnant to stop thinking they get to control whether or not somebody else should be forced to be pregnant if we lived in sci-fi land. But I live in reality. So why do you think you should have the right to force someone to remain pregnant against their will? Why does your view trump their view?
A major reason why I find myself against abortion, thinking it's, not good in a lot of circumstances, because it does end the life of a potential human child, and
It actually doesn't. Abortion's the termination of a non-viable pregnancy. But yes, you can frame it like that. But the question that I asked is, why should you or anyone else have the right to force someone else to be pregnant against their will?
I mean, that depends on how much you value autonomy in that sense, because we do make laws based on restricting people's actions. And when you say it's a non-viable pregnancy, that's well. Let me see if you agree with this. What I'm
No,
saying.
let's answer my question. I don't need to go through and explain anything about abortion. My question is, why do you think you should have the right to force someone to remain pregnant against their will? It's a straightforward question. Why do you get to force someone to remain pregnant instead of minding your own fucking business?
Like I said, it does end the life of a human child.
Why should you get to decide if somebody is forced to remain pregnant? It doesn't matter if it ends a life. Why should you get to decide that someone else should remain pregnant?
I'm not sure if we're going to come to an agreement on that.
I'm not sure if we're ever going to answer the question that I've asked, because you just keep avoiding it. What's the justification for you declaring that somebody else has to remain pregnant if they don't want to be?
Because as it stands, the only way we can solve that situation typically results in the death of the other person involved.
Okay, so Robert, I have a question. If Matt had some condition where the only way he could possibly stay alive is if I happen to be some perfect match, if I'm permanently attached to him with some kind of something to donate my blood to him at all times, should I be legally forced to do that? Because Matt's going to die if he gets unplugged from whatever I'm donating.
Well, now I'm confused. Okay, this is, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but there's like two different conversations, because if we're going to talk about hypotheticals, there's the hypothetical of what if we lived in a perfect world where we could remove the fetus.
I'm talking about right now with this hypothetical that I presented to you.
If they hook her up to me to serve as a living blood transfusion, this isn't science fiction. This fucking happens.
If you want, we could say if the only way he's going to survive in the next 24 hours is if I donate a kidney. Should I be legally forced to do that?
No, I don't see any reason why we should.
Right. Okay. So why should my body be legally mandated to keep alive a fetus if I don't want to consent to that?
Well,
so for example, do I have the right to use Eve's body without her consent?
No.
Why are you trying to give special rights to fetuses that other human beings don't have?
I do, and I appreciate you guys putting it out that way, but it does seem like a different situation to me, because
I'm sorry,
is not.
If I don't have the right to use Eve's body and you think a fetus does, isn't that you declaring special rights for fetuses?
I will have to think on that, because my initial thought is that, well, the fetus, it didn't ask to be using that.
It doesn't matter.
Body.
I'm not asking.
Matt didn't ask to lose a kidney.
Robert, this is so frustrating, because it's like you've never spent any time thinking about this or at all. Because here's the thing. What I asked was, why are you giving special rights to fetus? And you're like, oh, I'm going to have to think about this. And then you start giving potential reasons. There are potential reasons why you might consider hey, maybe we should grant special rights to fetus. I asked why you were willing to grant special rights to fetus, because I'm not. I don't grant special rights to fetuses. And yet every position that people are advocating for that shuts down abortion is in fact a granting of special rights to fetus, gives fetuses the right to do things that no person, no actual living, breathing, out on their own person gets, not even the 1-year-old. This is why people mock the right for being, calling them pro-birth when they're really, Eve's right, they're not pro-birth, but they're pro-gestation. They're not going to provide you the health care you need. They just don't want you to ever terminate your pregnancy. And this law has now resulted in 26,000 women in Texas alone having given birth to their rapist child. And the number of women in Texas alone who died while pregnant increased by 56%. 56% more women are dying while pregnant because of Texas's ban on abortions. Why do you want women to die? Why do you want to grant fetuses special rights? Why not just allow people bodily autonomy to control whether or not they want to take that risk and mind your own business outside of that?
Yeah.
Robert, I think you're
there are
so
people
so
dying
close to
and
to I think you're so close to getting what we're saying, and I hope that you really will go back and maybe even listen to this call. If you've been listening to the show as long as you say you have, I'd imagine you've probably already changed your mind throughout the course of some years on a lot of things. And I would ask that you please go listen to this and consider, if you're not voting, reconsider that and think about the situation that you're putting me in, which is to potentially have somebody legally require me to donate my body to another not even living being yet. And consider if that's a really good reason to not vote.
if I could say two things real quick.
Sure.
So there are people that are dying, and that's not good. Would you guys say
Congrats.
that? I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm sorry?
I just said congrats on determining that dying isn't good.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like nobody. I don't like it. Like the whether
Me neither.
the abortion thing. Yeah, we agree on that. But sorry, I lost my train of thought a bit here.
You were going to say two things. One was dying isn't good. What was the other one?
But there are a lot of people that. Would you say that a fully developed person has more right to life than the fetus that's in the person's body?
Yes.
I think that's where I might not be able to. I might not be seeing that properly, I guess.
Not only do I say that the person that's well, I'm not granting special rights to fetuses. You are.
Right. So we can say if this is a human, it has a right to life, but it doesn't have a right to stay in this person's body without
Right.
this person consenting to it.
It does not have a right to live at someone else's expense.
And that makes sense. That and that's why because I spoke to a few of my more skeptical friends online as well a couple years ago about this, and in that hypothetical scenario I brought up, maybe I can get your opinion on it. Do you think it would be better if, let's say, there's a person who's pregnant and for whatever reason they don't want to remain pregnant, we can remove that fetus without killing and destroying it? Because I don't like the idea of...
We do it all the time. We do cesarean section. We do it all the time.
Well, typically, if it's early on in the pregnancy, it can't survive outside of the person's body, So
Correct. That's why we're talking about the overwhelming majority of abortions are absolutely the termination of a pregnancy It's not abortion. Abortion is not a right to kill. It's not even necessarily a kill process.
I agree.
Though pragmatically, it does often destruct and result in the end of living material. Yes, that's a fact. But this is about whether or not that living material should get special rights over people.
Over anybody else.
And we can agree that if we could protect the fetus, we should definitely do that. But you're saying not.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't necessarily agree with that. And I don't see how that's relevant. This notion that, if we could protect the fetus, we should do that. I don't necessarily agree with that. And I don't think it's relevant.
Okay. So let's move on to the last thing I was going to say. I do think, because you say I haven't thought about this, and I'll say I am quite nervous calling. That's not because of you or anything. I just have a bit of anxiety. I called the
Me too, believe it or not,
show a few months back, and I they were very nice and everything, and I was a bit anxious there as well. It's just a talking thing.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
One thing that, and you guys brought this up as well, Eve, you especially hit on this, the legislation part of the abortion laws. I think that, honestly, and I see your view, Matt, on the bodily autonomy. You kind of look at it as from, philosophically, how do we justify that? The bodily autonomy thing. I think legislation-wise, that's a better argument. At least maybe not better, but I feel that deeper, because how do you determine, does this person need medical care that might be an abortion or a termination of the pregnancy? Who determines that?
The doctors.
That's something that I've
the doctor and
you have
the doctor, right. The person who went to school and knows what they're doing.
Yeah, given the choice between,
because you have the ectopic and.
Given the choice between a doctor making a decision about when terminating a pregnancy is medically necessary, or Ted Cruz, or Robert, or random congressperson, which of those is best qualified to make a decision about when an abortion is called for and medically necessary?
It's definitely a doctor.
Cool. So why then? Why do we need to ban it as a legislative action at all? Instead, if we have Roe v. Wade, if we have those protections, we set specific limits on how and when it could happen, so that we don't have people overreaching, and then we leave it up to the doctors and the medical ethicists whose job it is to evaluate this stuff. Why are we engaging in more and more limitations on rights and freedoms imposed by Congress when it comes to medical stuff? Congress is trying to make sure that women and people who can't get people who can get pregnant don't get to control their bodies. Congress, and I don't mean this as in everybody in Congress, I mean the people who are trying to get people in Congress to do this, they are trying to eliminate gender affirming care. As a matter of fact, there's a new lawsuit that I'm going to be talking about later this week, probably here in Texas, where they're trying to expand the state's ability to not only go after any doctor that has ever provided any sort of gender affirming care, including counseling and discussing gender affirming care, and they want to be able to track when women get pregnant in order to determine if they leave the state of Texas to go to some other state for an abortion. Why are we supporting fascist, draconian impositions by Congress rather than allowing people to make the decision themselves in conjunction with the medical experts? Why is it that a bunch of I really don't like abortion dudes think they should be the ones making the decision for other people?
Right. And what did you say that law was that was going after the doctors doing the trans care? Like, where is that from?
Texas. It's a lawsuit that I just got a phone call about last night while I was streaming, so I have not reviewed the lawsuit. I I have a number of people who have contacts that send me stuff, but yeah, the Attorney General, they're trying to go after anyone in the state of Texas who might be leaving to get an abortion, and anyone in the state of Texas that is supporting any sort of gender affirming care, especially on minors. And that means if your 12-year-old goes and talks to their therapist and says, I think I might be trans, if your therapist talks to them at all in any sort of way that would be remotely supportive of the concept, they can then go after them, is what they want to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really bad thing if they
Me too.
implement that. That's not good.
So Robert, let me ask you this.
Yeah. See, we agree on that too.
If we took abortion completely off the table, so that the one issue that is your stumbling block, if that issue goes away, who do you vote for?
Kamala. Sorry, I don't mean to keep mispronouncing her name.
Okay, that's fine. I have occasionally done it as well, in part because of thanks for that. Because of Marvel's Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel. They spelled the same way, pronounced different. I'm going to screw it up on occasion too. It's easy, just correct it and move on. But I like it. I like the thing that just shows a comma with LA after it, so it's Kamala. But
yeah,
let's assume
Jimmy brought that up, and I try to remember that.
So now the abortion's the only thing that's keeping you from voting for Kamala. So did you vote in 2016? Or were you not old enough?
I voted for Evan McMullen. I voted third party.
In 2016?
Yes, I was 19, I think, and I voted for Evan McMullen.
Yeah. And Evan, I suppose, was opposed to abortion?
Yes. He was a third party. He was mostly on the conservative side, but he was kind of one of those anti-Trumpers.
Okay. Have you ever voted for anybody that was in favor of abortion?
Sorry, are you still there? The phone sounded like it cut out.
I'm still here.
Yeah, he asked if you've ever voted for anybody in favor of abortion.
Okay. No, that was the only presidential election I voted in, and I'm not involved in local politics or anything like that.
Okay. Then I'll just be as frank as I can. If abortion is that big of a deal to you and it's that important, then the right candidate to support your values is Donald Trump. And if we can't convince you to support Kamala for the 95,000 other things that you probably favor a view on, then I'd rather have you not vote or vote third party. But it's just wild to me that there are people who I get it. There's a glib line that comes from some people that are like, if you don't have an abortion, if you don't like abortion, don't have one. That's a bad argument. There's also people who are like, men shouldn't have any say in, women's body. That's ridiculous as well. That's not how laws are made. That's not. And by the way, you guys, everybody who can get pregnant would definitely rather have me making laws about their body than Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert. I'm going to do better by women.
Yeah.
Anybody with a uterus is like, yes, Matt's my dude. But I get the sentiment. And I think probably part of the problem here, Robert, is that you kind of embody what some people are going to do as the nutshell argument to dismiss dudes, because you're never going to be pregnant. And because of that, you can sit in a position of privilege knowing that you're never going to have to face the consequences. So how would you explain to Eve, if Eve becomes pregnant and wants to not be pregnant, how would you explain to Eve why you're not going to let her stop being pregnant?
Well, this is kind of what I was going with my second point before I got sidetracked, because I'm all over the place at times. The legislation part of this that you brought up and that I've been thinking about that made me call in the first place, because if I was just, no abortions whatsoever, that's easy. But that's also being a one issue voter, and I don't want to think of myself as that, even though
Right.
obviously that's what I'm doing right now. Like if somebody, and you, Matt, you brought up they're checking the women for pregnancy, they want to do that. If someone has an abortion, how do you legislate? Was that medically necessary? Was that not medically necessary? Like you said, that's the government kind of making those kind of decisions. And I don't know, that seems like I understand, because like I don't know if the call screener told you guys I'm a Christian. I actually have a lot of Christian friends, including a pastor friend of mine who's a very good friend, and all of them, the one thing that holds a lot of them back, and I'm assuming this is big for a lot of other people as well, is abortion. That's the thing that stops them from.
I'm sorry, Robert. Eve, do you think that remotely addressed your concern about being pregnant and not being allowed to terminate it? Because I don't.
No, and Robert, here's my question for you.
That was my mistake.
It's okay. I appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate that you're willing to kind of think through this position you've landed in. That I don't think you're going to continue. I think that you're already trying to think critically about this, and I really appreciate it. Here's my question for you, because it sounds like we agreed on a lot of points about not legislating women's bodies or anyone's body to that degree, and we know that Donald Trump is advocating to do that. Like the right is advocating to do that. They have this Project 2025 thing, and Kamala is not saying, I'm going to mandate abortion. She's not going to say, like, now everyone that can needs to go get abortions. I would understand then if you're like, well, can't vote for her because of this one issue. She is actually just actively looking out for the autonomy of women. And I understand that you haven't figured out yet fully exactly where you line up on what you think the government should or shouldn't legislate with that. But wouldn't you rather err on the side of freedom for women to decide what happens with their body, for really just anybody, though? Like, we don't want this to become a trend where the government is making these sorts of decisions that should be made by doctors.
Right. And like I mentioned a little earlier, I kind of became disillusioned with a lot of the conservative politics and people in America, because that's kind of what they sell themselves as, is like, we're the small government, we're the freedom, and the Democrats are the fascist, evil people, crazy people, whatever. But then they're like, well, but
they're projecting.
As long as you're a Christian, as long as you're like, when you're American president, you got to be president for all the Americans. You know what I mean? And we got gay people, we got trans people, we got, like I said, people that might need abortion care. That's the one thing I'm working through.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're making laws for all those people, that builds up all those people, not just the white dudes. You know what I mean? Like, and that's
Robert, it sounds like you don't. Yeah, it sounds like you really don't want someone like Donald Trump in office. I think that's a really good reason for you to go vote.
I really do.
You really do. And the only chance at that not happening is to vote for Kamala, because we know a third party's not going to make it, and to not vote is obviously only going to benefit. So I don't know. I hope we've started to have you rethink your decision about voting, because I think that this is an issue that you actually align with us more than you realized when you called. And I think it's good for you to go maybe hear more of these points of other people talking about it as well. Because if you are looking to protect the most amount of living people, whether we agree on what that is or not, regardless, I think there is a clear candidate that is looking to do that, and one that is not. Yeah. One that is only in this for his own best interest. Yeah. I don't think he's looking to protect anybody's life or make anybody's life better. There's nothing pro-life happening over there, But I really appreciate this conversation, Robert, and I really appreciate you hearing us out on this.
Right.
And when you work through it, I'm going to let you go because I got to get on to some other callers.
Sorry.
I'm going to let you go because we got to get to some other callers. But when you work through this, you may never get to the same position that I have. Because, for example, I never, ever, ever give a shit if an abortion is medically necessary. I don't think that advocating for individual freedom and autonomy in any way is contingent on whether or not something's necessary. It's not necessary for me to wear socks that match, but sometimes I do. Apologies to Stephen Fry for partially stealing his analogy, but the very notion that we should, like, I went for the easy questions to begin with because, for example, Ted Cruz doesn't want exceptions for incest or rape, but a lot of people do. You either don't or might not, and I would
currently know.
Yeah, and I would wonder how much of this is tied to notions of theism, because if you think, for example, that there is a God who has a plan and that this pregnancy, even if it came from a rape or incest situation, is part of God's plan, then that will impact whether or not you're willing to make exceptions in those cases, because if it came from God, it can't be bad. And unfortunately, for anybody who thinks like that, and fortunately for the rest of us, we don't get to rely on people's religious suspicions about what God wants when we're trying to enact legislation. That's where the church-state separation thing comes in. And so when we instead look at the facts, for me, it's pretty straightforward. If somebody does not want to be pregnant, not only do I not know what justification we have that could ever force them, I don't know why forcing them to remain pregnant could be a good deal for anybody. And one thing to look up, just because you might be as ill-informed as I was, I don't know for sure, but you could be, because I was an idiot. Carrying a child to term permanently alters the pregnant person's physiology. Not just having a baby, not just being pregnant, but the 9-month process of carrying a child to term permanently alters the pregnant person's body in a number of different ways. This is not, we grow up in a world where, hey, look, we were all the result of a pregnancy, and people get pregnant all the time, and 10-year-olds get pregnant and deliver just fine, and so-and-so had 12 babies and all that. We live in this world where pregnancy is just kind of like, yeah, oh, cool, I'm glad you're pregnant. It's so happy, so happy, so happy. And we don't think about anything because we've advanced medically enough to where the infant mortality rate has declined to where the rate of women dying in pregnancy and in complications due to pregnancy, all of that declines. And so we look at it like, it's no big deal. You're going to have a baby. And then you take a couple days off and then you go back to work. Look into what you're actually advocating, which is to force someone who does not want to remain pregnant, taking a constant risk to their health and their life. Granted, it's not the biggest risk ever because we've made some progress medically, but you're forcing them to put their life and their health and their finances at risk in order to say, hey, that fetus needs its chance to live. That's never enough for me. But yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot for calling, Robert. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah. No problem. It's good. Have a good night, guys.
You too.
You too.
And if you're not going to vote for Harris, don't vote.
Yeah, I
It's
really
fun
hope
stuff.
he'll reconsider. I feel like there was way more reasons for him to vote for Harris than to not vote. So,
Hey there, Eric. Noting that anyone watching that clip makes atrociously poor life decisions, where should they send their protection money to prevent further damage?
All protection money should be sent to patreon.com/calltheline, or else we will break your kneecaps.
Okay, we can't say that. I think we can't
no
say
threats?
that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hit like and subscribe.